In Matthew chapter 15, in verses 30 and 31, I'm going to read that for you. It says, "Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel." I love the connection between praise and the works of Jesus. But here, this is really important because this is following a passage about the children's bread. It's following the passage where Jesus ends up delivering the daughter of a Canaanite woman, and he calls that healing or deliverance, he calls that the children's bread. And so when he goes on into this section where the crowd has come and he is healing them and making them whole, he's continuing to distribute the children's bread. If you would have been a disciple with Jesus when he used that phrase with the Canaanite woman, then you would have seen the connection right after that when the crowds came to him, that he continued to distribute the children's bread, not only to the Canaanite woman's daughter, but also to the crowds here. So there's a connection, there's a continuity of thought. And then, what is the children's bread? Well, it is the saving substance that Jesus brings. It flows from who he is, and it meets our most basic human needs. That's the children's bread. And then, to continue the bread theme, he goes on to multiply bread for the 4,000 here, and he is revealing himself verse after verse after verse as the bread man, the one who distributes this life-giving, saving substance. In John 6, Jesus is speaking to the crowd. He just multiplied bread and fish for. And he reveals himself as the bread of life, the giver of eternal life. And sometimes I think that we as Christians feel the need to say eternal life is the most important thing. Healing and deliverance, the children's bread, is not as important. And so it doesn't really matter. What matters is eternal life. And I think that's a false dichotomy that we don't need to get caught up in. I don't think the Bible divides Jesus against himself, that certain things are more important than others. I don't feel like we need to make that judgment call. Instead, I think we need to simply say yes to everything that God offers us. This clearly mattered to Jesus that the sick were healed. In Matthew 15, we just read about how he healed the crowds that came to him. And then he goes on and says, I have compassion on them, and so I'm going to meet their needs of food. And he multiplies the bread and the fish. Jesus isn't divided. His works are an extension of himself. The things that Jesus does reveals who he is. He gives the children's bread because he is the bread of life. The two are working together. They're not competing. Besides, God already gave us the most valuable thing. He gave us his Son. How will he not graciously with him give us all things? And so we might want to say, what if people end up desiring the gifts, the children's bread, the provision, more than they desire the giver? And I can most certainly guarantee you that will happen. In fact, that did happen. In John 6, with the crowd of 5,000 that Jesus was addressing, they wanted to promote him as king simply because he could multiply food for them. They wanted to use the giver to get to his gifts. So it happened, it will happen, but notice Jesus still chooses to multiply the bread and feed the crowd. And so he saw value in this. And Jesus used this miraculous work of multiplying bread and feeding the crowd as an opportunity to show them who he was, to reveal his identity as the bread of life. The two work together. Again, our job is simply to say yes to Jesus, what he offers and who he is, because they don't have to be completely separate.